Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wilson. Today, we are joined by Dr. Monica Blied, whose work focuses on late diagnosis in mental health. Dr. Blied is a clinical psychologist, adjunct professor of psychology at Pepperdine University, and the founder of Faces of Health. In her private practice, Dr. Blied provides psychological assessments for adults and children who suspect they have autism, ADHD, or a learning difference. Our conversation today will focus on why certain conditions like ADHD, autism, and learning disorders are often diagnosed late, the reasons many individuals are overlooked, and the implications of those missed diagnoses.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Blied, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to speak with you and with your listeners.
I'm excited too. And I'm grateful to you for agreeing to dive into today's topic with me. I gave a little bit of an intro about it, and we've had conversations about how crucial it is to identify ADHD, autism, other learning differences early in life. We've talked offline about it. I think I've talked with a lot of practitioners, parents, and educators about this topic because it's just so many individuals are overlooked.
Yes.
And oftentimes they are girls, they are women, they're from marginalized communities, and it seems that there maybe even be some systemic biases at play here.
Yes, absolutely. So as far as this systemic biases that happen, there are studies that show that people of color are typically misdiagnosed as children with oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder when they actually have ADHD, or ADHD is at least part of the picture. And then as adults with bipolar disorder, when they are actually neurodivergent having ADHD.
It's so interesting. And I think there's so much misinformation, right? Because I think there's a tendency to believe that there's overdiagnosis in those communities when in fact there's sometimes underdiagnosis and misdiagnoses, like you're saying. And that belief that behaviors that they're seeing are oppositional or defiant behaviors contributes to suspensions, kids getting expelled from school, and that takes them out of the learning environment.
Yes. And, one of the things that we know about ADHD in particular is that when we see an unmotivated, child, that's kind of what we perceive. It's not willful behavior that child has a hard time getting started or has a hard time staying put or staying focused on whatever the learning, activity is. ADHD and autism are neurodevelopmental disorders. They are brain-based biological conditions that make our brains unique, make them special. And so when we talk about, unique brain styles, that's something that, parents and individuals, because we're talking about late diagnosis today, need to know it's nothing wrong with you. And it's not a failure in character. It's not, like I said, willful defiance, those sorts of things. There's difference in how the brain is structured, how it's wired, the chemical makeup, all these things that contribute to some of the behaviors that we see, both good and, undesirable.
Right. And it's that difference in brain wiring that contributes to differences in the way individuals think, the way they learn,
Yes.
the way they navigate the world, the way they see things.
Yes, the way
And
they see and perceive the world.
absolutely, absolutely. So why do kids get missed early on? It seems like we're in a world where we know so much about autism, about ADHD, about other learning and thinking differences, neurodevelopmental disorders, but so many kids still get missed. Why is that? I know that this is a loaded question because there are so many reasons, but let's start there.
Girl, I got a whole list.
I know you do. I've got mine too. Let's start with yours.
So let's start with, there may already be an identified patient in the family. And so perhaps there is a sibling who has more what we call, as psychologists, externalizing behaviors, or what teachers and parents see as like problem behaviors, like that need a lot of attention or discipline, or, kind of just trying to navigate around. And there may be another sibling who has more internalizing issues, meaning they also are struggling, but it shows up as anxiety that's inside of them, as low self-esteem, as things that they don't necessarily share. So they may not be, hitting their sibling. They may not be throwing chairs in the classroom, but it doesn't mean that they don't have some sort of struggle. And so I actually tested two siblings. First, it was just the 14-year-old brother, and he, identified him as ADHD. But earlier on in childhood, he had gotten diagnosed with, I think they just said like, he has all these problems. He had already been in the back of a cop car by the time he was 9 years old, like just a lot going on, gotten kicked out of school, gotten kicked out of therapy, and he gotten tested. And I think the results were like, he's highly gifted. And these behaviors are a result of like his giftedness. And so that was a missed opportunity when I tested him, and the gift of time passing by an additional 5 years, we got to see over time, yes, this individual is smart, but he's also causing so much chaos in the home. He's homeschooled at this point. School wasn't an option anymore, where mom and sister are afraid because there were like these huge bursts, disruptions of like emotional dysregulation, these tempers, and irritability, in between these tempers, where everyone in the household was kind of walking on ice. He actually met diagnostic criteria for disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. What happened, I think, earlier with the previous assessment was DMDD, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, wasn't yet in the DSM. So, there's that. But then also, again, the gift of time, us being able to see like, okay, over time, these things aren't improving, they're getting worse. And all the attention in the family was on this boy because they're just trying to like, just try to have some sort of semblance of peace or a little bit less chaos in the house. And it wasn't until several months later when the older sister, the 17-year-old, was failing her senior year of high school, that the parents were like, okay, wait, what's going on with our daughter? She's always been our golden child. Like, what's happening? And so I had tested her, like, because they're seeing like so much potential not being really utilized because I don't want to go to school anymore. Like, I'm just not interested, and just stopped doing everything. And as I'm talking to her, and they initially come in for an ADHD assessment, I'm like, parents, I think we need to do autism testing for your daughter, because she has a couple of things that are just really unique about her. One is that she knows everything about bugs. like everything about bugs and insects, and has known since she was a young child. So this was a special interest of her. And also, like, she creates jewelry with resin, like out of bugs that she like finds and collects, and things like that. So that was peculiar. And when I started the autism evaluation with the parents, there's a parent only interview, and I'm asking them questions about when she was much younger, specifically between the ages of 4 and 5 years old. This is when we typically develop something called theory of mind, which is the ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And there's a number of questions in this particular interview that give us like a rating of like, are there autistic features there or not, or is it kind of ADHD spectrum, right? And some of the things that the parents told me that kind of really kind of piqued my attention was that when they were younger, there was this unusual preoccupation, that this is what we call it as psychologists, unusual preoccupation, that the child had of fire hydrants. So for the family, it wasn't unusual. It was just kind of, the girl's quirk, where anytime they passed by a fire hydrant, it didn't even matter if they were in the car. They had to stop, and she would like spend time on the fire hydrant. She would climb up on it, and like that was like her thing. So like all these things came together, and it goes into one of the other reasons why someone may be missed. You may have a family that is really nurturing and really normalize some of the behaviors that are actually atypical. And so throughout the process, we were able to identify not only were those like special interests and unusual preoccupations, but this girl struggled throughout her entire life to make and keep friendships, and didn't really have an organic understanding of what does it mean to be a friend versus just a classmate, and why do people get married besides like the kind of practical things. The emotional component was missing, and so there are all these areas of support that we were able to identify. But she was missed up until 17, up until she started failing high school. And this is a kid who's 99th percentile IQ, very, very brilliant. And these things were happening. She was struggling because she's just like, okay, my brother has been the center of attention, like, but I'm still having these significant issues, even if I'm not the one who's externalizing or kind of causing, challenges within the family. It was just such a gift for me to be able to support the family. And they actually had emailed me maybe like a year later and gave me an update on her, how like the family relationships were so much better because they finally like understood her better once they started to do their own research and learn more about the autistic brain style. The conversations were smoother, like she was stable and happy in life. And that happiness, that bringing her back from the brink of suicidality is like why I do this work.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's so many important things that you said. And I love the distinction between individuals who internalize and externalize, because when you externalize, those behaviors are so obvious, right? Those are the kids who can't stay in their seat. They're always moving around. They're always getting in trouble at school. But it's oftentimes the kids who are internalizing that get missed. Those are the kids who are sitting in the classroom, look like they're paying attention. And it's not until you call on them and they're like, what? What
Right.
did you say? What would you say? Are you calling on me? Right? You don't know, right? Because they can get lost in the sea of 20 plus other students in the class. And oftentimes they are doing really well in school. And it's not until those academic demands increase, till the demands for executive functioning increase, or the social complexity increases, and they just can't keep up, right? And that impacts them in so many different ways. And And it's just and that's why it's so important to have this kind of conversations, because there are so many potential consequences of a late diagnosis. And you mentioned anxiety, you mentioned disengagement. I've seen it too with siblings where that externalizing kid gets identified right away. That's the 5-year-old that the parents are bringing into the office because, the kindergarten teacher is saying something's up. I can't, get him to engage with the learning. But it's the sibling who comes in late middle school, high school, or even university who has been kind of compensating for struggles all along. And then at that later stage, there's often anxiety, depression, self-concept issues, a decrease in motivation. And, I'd love for you to kind of talk about some of the reasons why women get missed, or women get missed when they are girls, because, we've talked about this in respect to ADHD, but again, I think the discussion you just had about masking, is so important. Overcompensating. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah. And so when we talk about individuals assigned female at birth, these are the girls, and the women, or later on the non-binary women and the transmasculine, non-binary individuals and the transmasculine individuals or men who they got missed for various reasons. Usually these individuals are also quite bright. Because if there's an academic impairment, meaning they're getting C's and D's and F's, the teachers are going to flag them and the school districts are going to test. But when there's not, even if they're getting straight A's and, not easily, the parents are spending, 3 or 4 hours fussing at them every night to get 30 minutes of homework done. Those are things in the environment that are great that they have that much parental support, but also contribute to a late diagnosis. Individuals assigned female at birth, especially, are socialized to fit in, to be compliant, to not break the mold. I think there's a lot more grace culturally for individuals assigned male at birth, for little boys to kind of be weird or awkward or offbeat, and other boys are just like, oh, okay, cool, versus little girls are mean, especially when you get to middle school and high school. There are these cliques, and there's
so tough for girls.
Really tough.
Right.
There's these additional expectations for conformity. And I think that definitely, in addition to, being bright, getting, decent or good grades, that can contribute to a person going years. The average age of diagnosis for ADHD in women is 37. 37, that's average. That means there are women much older than that who are first time getting diagnosed. In fact, when I got diagnosed for the first time, I met the statistic. I was 37. And for autism, it's even worse. The most recent statistic that I heard is by 18 years old, 80% of women who are autistic are still undiagnosed. Only 20% of females are getting diagnosed in early childhood. Those are typically, because there are 3 support levels with autism. Those are typically the level 3s and the level 2s. But there are so many that don't, individuals assigned female at birth, women who don't fit the mold or stereotype of autism, who can have a conversation, although you may not recognize the savvy person, the unsavvy person may not recognize that the conversation is really based on what they're most interested in, and it's hard to kind of go to something else. Kind of more one-sided conversations. They may have strong eye contact or consistent eye gaze, but it's learned and practiced. Or they may not be stereotypically interested in trains in dinosaurs, which is what you think of when you think of what the media portrays as someone who is autistic. It's usually a young white male, and they have these unusual preoccupations. But what we see in girls is that they may have typical special interest, like TV shows and movies, but it's really repetitive, watching it over and over again, or celebrities or video games. Their special interest may be people. Testing someone right now who was missed from early diagnosis and is 23 right now. And the parents, one parent is just like, there's no way that my girl, my adult daughter is autistic. And the dad is like, well, maybe, because I've read a little bit about what autism can look like in girls, but if so, then she must be really high masking. And this is an individual who her special interest was people. But the way that it showed up was these codependent relationships where she would have one friend, make one friend, but she would mold her identity to fit into whatever that friend wanted and needed. And that is the way she adapted. That is the way that she survived these, this complex social world that was hard work for her brain.
Right. Absolutely. And I love that example because when you have young people, and I've, interviewed so many young people, parents, kids who consistently suppress or hide signature characteristics of autism, or they mirror the behavior of neurotypical people. They develop scripts for social situations where they say the same thing. They know what they're supposed to say. They know that they're supposed to say, "Hi, how are you doing?" And when you are living that inauthentic life, it's exhausting, is what they say. It's exhausting, and it takes a toll on mental health. And it's one of the reasons why young people get missed is because of this masking. It's because of overcompensating for your struggles.
Yeah, these learned strategies. And so even when we get to our diagnostic manual, it says that the autistic features that we're supposed to identify, they may be masked by learned strategies later in life. Or they may, not show up until the demands, the social demands, the environmental demands, as you said, Dr. Wilson, overwhelm their learned capacity, their compensatory strategies that they had been using. All of a sudden, when things change, so I've had, clients where they were doing great. I had this one client who was software engineer, and she was doing fabulous, well enough considering the struggles that she had. But then she got a promotion and her team changed. And so all of a sudden, the scripts that she developed, the ways of being in these different relationships that she had learned in practice, everything was upended, and it was too much.
Right.
It's definitely impacted her mental health. It was actually her therapist who recommended her for testing.
Right. And it is that pattern that I see also. I mean, I assess a number of kids, but I'm seeing increasingly a number of women who are seeking an assessment, for ADHD, for autism. And what the research shows is that a lot of these individuals are seeking out, treatment for other secondary issues like anxiety and depression. And then when you dig into the history, you see, like you're saying, that these issues with ADHD, with attention, focus, executive functioning have always been there. And what I've heard from women is that, things were going well until high school, until university, until I had kids, until I started my first job. And again, it's those demands, the demands for executive functioning, the complexity of the situations. Those are the things that people who are not neurodivergent can adapt and be flexible and adjust to. But when you have a learning or thinking difference, it's so much harder.
So much harder. And another reason why they may get missed is because practitioners aren't aware of neurodivergence and what it looks like and how it shows up. Like I've had some people come to me for second testing, for a second opinion, who the previous clinician said, oh, well, you weren't diagnosed at 5 years old. There's no way that you could have it now. Like, wait, what? Or like, actually, this is more common in boys. And so I just wanted to share with your audience, this is so important to know that as far as gender dynamics in children, ADHD is diagnosed, ADHD and autism actually diagnosed 4-1, 4 boys for every 1 girl. By the time we get to adulthood, over 18 years old, it's 4 girls, 4 women for every 4 men. It is a 1-to-1 ratio with ADHD. With autism, it's 4 women for every 3 men. It's actually more prominent once we get to adulthood. But the thinking societally, is that it's more prominent in boys, it's more prominent in men, both conditions, because those are typically the populations that are more studied and that you see on TV.
Right. Absolutely. And I love that you brought up the fact that it's not just, people's perceptions, like lay people's perceptions of ADHD. It's also practitioners in terms of their perspective, their training in terms of what ADHD, what autism should look like. I just, did an evaluation for a young girl, and the parents said, we took her to her pediatrician. We filled out those rating forms. And because the teachers didn't endorse significant ADHD symptoms, the pediatrician said that it can't be ADHD. And it's, yes, we want to see the behaviors in 2 or more settings, but oftentimes a teacher who has 30 kids in their classroom is not going to see an inattentive ADHD. They're just not, right? Until things start to break down.
Or what I've seen a lot is, because you have to ask the question, what I've seen a lot is kids want to people please and do well with authority figures. And so they may be struggling, but they're trying their hardest in school. And then what we see is this kind of explosion of anxiety and disobedience, if you want to call that, all these things when they get home, because they've been masking, because they've been working so hard under this pressure at school. And so, teachers don't see it because that's the star student. But at home, the parents are saying like, okay, like, your room is a mess. We can't find anything. Or why is it taking so long to get ready in the morning? Like all these behaviors. And then the friends see it too, because we need 2 or more settings. The friends will see like, why can't you stick on one topic? Why you keep interrupting?
Absolutely.
Because combined presentation or hyperactive ADHD can look different in girls. The hyperactivity may not be climbing off the walls and throwing things, but maybe talking too much.
Right. Absolutely. And then going back to the perspective of educators or parents, teachers might say, well, all girls talk too much. But, everybody has struggles with attention. I've had, when I was teaching at the university level, I had interacted with professors, and there are people who have PhDs who, is ADHD a real thing? Doesn't everybody struggle with attention? So there's still that belief in some individuals that it really doesn't exist. And so I think that kind of contributes to late diagnoses, misdiagnoses, misunderstanding, mislabeling. And then also because ADHD is much more than just inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. So if they don't see those 3 things overtly, they say it can't be. But we know that, for example, emotional dysregulation is a key feature of ADHD.
Yes.
And oftentimes that's the first thing to manifest, particularly in really young kids.
Exactly. Let me share with you a little bit about how features of ADHD and autism may show up differently in girls and individuals at birth. For autism, they may be super social, especially when you have like a highly verbal girl, but the conversation may be one-sided in childhood. These are the girls who get along best with people older than them because worldly adults and individuals older are pretty gracious with these sorts of conversations, or people much younger than them. And so those are one of the questions that I ask parents, like, do they have any same age peers? And how are those relationships? They, like I said before, they may have an intense interest in people. There are social and societal pressures to fit in. Eye contact may be learned. So you can't just say like, oh, that person can look me in the face when they're talking, so they're fine. Like, you need to ask about their experiences. With ADHD, excessive talking, like we talked about, a tendency to daydream for girls, maybe withdrawn or anxious. They can be aggressive or very sensitive. Low self-esteem typically shows up in all these individuals who are late diagnosed. They also may be disorganized or messy. I remember when I was a kid, like, it was hard trying to find things in my desk and in my backpack, because it was all the papers and like it was a lot going on, but people just assigned that to, or my mom just assigned that to, like, oh, okay, she's just messy. Not seeing that there was a broader umbrella of executive functioning challenges that I had. Maybe some fidgeting, forgetfulness, inability to follow through, easily distracted. Something that's really important to know, that there is a high co-occurrence rate or intersection between autism and the LGBTQIA population and non-binary or gender divergent individuals. And also, there are higher rates of autism in particular medical conditions such as EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, that a lot of people aren't aware of. But now that they're listening to this podcast, they can say like, oh, I have this student, or I have, my adult child who's always been like super bendy flexible, or been diagnosed with EDS. And they're also, gender nonconforming. And they also have these little like idiosyncrasies. I wonder if they're actually autistic. I wonder if that could be a better explanation for their experiences, so that they don't have to have unnecessary struggle. They can get the support that they need.
And that is really the goal, right? Is to make sure that everybody gets the support that they need in order to live the life that they deserve to live. And I know that we've been focusing on ADHD and autism for this conversation, but it happens in other learning disabilities, learning differences as well. I mean, I've seen it in dyslexia, where kids who have exceptional memories will memorize what words look like until 6th grade. And you will not know that they cannot apply phonics to their reading until, again, the reading demands have increased so significantly that they can no longer use that strategy. And that's kind of what we're seeing across all neurodiverse presentations of individuals who are missed, get diagnosed later, is that, the strategies that they've been using for so long no longer work for them, no longer serve them. Things have broken down, and now they're either anxious, they're depressed, they're withdrawn, and then they're seeking out, some understanding as to why this has been a struggle for them for so long.
Yeah. And they've had, so many experiences of being invalidated, of being gaslit, of being said like, oh, you're fine because, and then fill in the compensatory strategy. I've also seen with dyslexia where once the kids get to like 9th, 10th grade, where math involves more words and reading, that then they're diagnosed. And so all those years of being missed, all those years of missed opportunities for intervention.
That's it. That's really it. It's missed opportunities. And I'm hoping that conversations like this, and I'm going to link to other podcast episodes that talk about, girls and autism, girls and ADHD, neurodivergent presentations in marginalized communities, that, people will be more aware of masking, of overcompensating, compensating in general, how it shows up as perfectionism for many individuals, which creates a lot of anxiety.
Right? Exactly.
And so for parents, for educators, for individuals who suspect a misdiagnosis in themselves or in others, what steps do you recommend that they take?
Yeah, I recommend first that they find other people. So maybe there's someone in their community, or maybe there's someone in a support group, or even in an online forum who was late diagnosed. I've seen a lot of people come because they strongly identify, resonate with people who are sharing their lived experiences. So getting that validation and community gathering is really important. The second thing is educating themselves. There are a lot of books, and we'll put some in the show notes, on late diagnosis, on what autism specifically looks like in girls and women. And even I can share some of the resources that I have on late diagnosis of ADHD and autism. And so empowering yourself and educating yourself with as much information as possible is so key. And then finding someone like myself and Dr. Wilson who specialize in the identification of folks who might have been missed in late diagnosis of neurodivergence. I think that's really key to kind of get that seal of, yes, this is your diagnosis. This is an explanation for your experiences, to finally have that so that you can have a very clear path forward.
Right. And you've got the clinical expertise and the lived experience. And I know that listeners are going to want to connect with you. What is the best way for them to do that?
Yes, my website, it's drblied.com. And specifically for assessment, it's drblied.com/ADHD. And on that page, I have videos of me sharing what the assessment process looks like. I have photos of like in testing with masks on so that people can get an idea of this is what the experience will be like, and step by step by step what to expect. And so that it feels less daunting, and just knowing that we're having a conversation, and that if you're coming to me, most of the time the person is pretty solid already. They've done their research, and then I'm confirming or actually understanding that it's something else because I specialize in differential diagnosis. And so maybe you have all these things going on, and it is ADHD spectrum with rejection sensitive dysphoria, and it's not autism spectrum. And so just understanding that again can give people a very clear path forward for next steps.
That's wonderful. And I'll be sure to provide a link to your website and to your YouTube channel. You provide a lot of information, great information there as well. And there are going to be a lot of resources in the show notes. So if anyone who's listening, make sure you check out the show notes for this episode. It'll be very beneficial. And I can't thank you enough, Dr. Blied, for this conversation. It's such an important conversation. It really is the cornerstone of, the reason why I do this work. It's to really increase understanding and awareness of these learning challenges, these differences in thinking, these differences in interacting with the world that so many people, experience in their day-to-day life. And again, wanting to increase the information so that people can seek out and receive the support they need to live their best lives.
Yes. And not only live their best lives, Dr. Wilson, but it changes the atmosphere of all their relationships. Finally, they can show up advocating for themselves. Like, now that I know that transitions and changes to my routine are hard work for my brain, I can stand up for myself and say, no, actually, if we're going to change the plan, I need to know a day ahead so that I can mentally prepare and so that I can energetically prepare. They can start to really speak up for themselves with confidence and more self-compassion instead of beating themselves up and getting hard on themselves for the ways that their brains have to work harder than a neurotypical person. They can say you know what, it's okay. It's okay. I'm, built differently. And that comes with some unique strengths, and I'm going to, use all those strengths and contribute to the world in these amazing ways. And it comes with these challenges that I'm learning how to navigate. And I'm going to surround myself also with a community. I'm going back to that, with finding my people so that I know and feel that I am not alone in this. It's so empowering.
It is absolutely empowering. And thank you again so much. This is going to help so many people.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Blied. Be sure to check out the show notes. There is a great deal of information about how to connect with her and how to get additional resources for ADHD, autism, and other learning differences. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.